Fran Bow is a violent, tragic, and deeply uncomfortable psychological point-and-click horror game developed by the indie studio Killmonday, and the name alone should cause countless players to remember precious moments of their youth spent watching Let's Players take them on a journey through the darkest Alice in Wonderland-inspired adventure yet, or at least a contender for it. Despite their output being only 2 games, the studio is incredibly popular within the indie horror community, with their next title, Little Misfortune, being pretty comparable to Fran Bow's success. I have an exclusive review of that game on my Patreon page, available to Jawcoin and above tier patrons, just in case you're curious. Down the Rabbit Hole doesn't even begin to describe the kind of nightmare this little girl is in for. From the moment her parents are killed in the prologue, she has to navigate life through the asylum she's confined to, the eerie and threatening world around her, and peel back reality itself as the mysterious drug she takes exposes her into the fantastical and even sci-fi truth behind existence and humanity. This isn't just a puzzle game with an unreliable narrator. I would argue it's an absolute classic that helped popularize the juggernaut genre of horror point-and-click games for years to come in the 2010s and beyond. Of course, there were other titles doing this decades prior, but thanks to Fran Bow, the cat lady before it, and later Sally Face, it showed the world that anyone could craft a terrifying world full of interesting characters and spectacular world building all on their own, and Killmonday Games were just the right people for it. Killmonday is a studio founded in 2012 and run by husband and wife duo Natalia and Isak Martinson. The two feel like a horror-tinted modern-day version of Ken and Roberta Williams from Sierra Online fame. Natalia is the storyteller and makes the creative decisions, while Isak is the core programmer who stitches everything together behind the scenes. Both of them were always involved in the arts, working on various paintings and short films throughout their adulthood, with 2011's Polly looking eerily reminiscent of what was to come later in the decade. As much as they loved to create, they felt that the mediums they worked in were a little limiting for the stories they wanted to tell, which were deeply personal and traumatic, with grand worlds with establishing a strong connection between the characters and the player being at the forefront. They were doing their best to survive working full-time day jobs in Stockholm, Sweden while they worked on these pursuits on the side. But in 2012, everything changed when they saw Indie Game, the movie. The film, or more accurately the people in it, have a bit of a sour reputation nowadays, but Jonathan Blow and Phil Fish used to be respected creators and were living proof that people could not only make a living off of creating independent video games, they could rock the foundation of the medium. From that moment onward, both Natalia and Isak knew exactly what they wanted to do with their lives. Killmonday Games was named that because they only had time to work on their passion projects during the weekend, while the weekdays were reserved for their miserable jobs meant to keep them afloat. When Monday showed up, we were always angry of it. They released a couple simple games meant for Isak to grow his programming ability before they got serious. Game Maker was an incredibly useful engine for people designing point-and-clicks because you don't need that much coding knowledge in order to make a mechanically simple game. It's mostly just the art assets you have to worry about, which Natalia covered entirely herself. As someone who used to live by working full-time at a grocery store while they cultivated their creative projects on the weekends until they took off, it's an absolutely miserable process that would drive anyone crazy, and the pair understood this as they kept sharpening their skills and restarting development and generally having a dreadful time learning everything on the fly. Fran Bow was the apple of their eye, and they were willing to bet everything on it. But there was an elephant in the room that needed to be addressed. What they wanted to achieve would require far more than a 2-day work week. In the summer of 2013, Natalia set up an Indiegogo campaign asking for a measly $20,000 to fund this game, and they received several thousand more than the asking price, which meant they could leave their jobs and work on Fran Bow full-time, something that was extensively cataloged with a demo that was launched and various developer updates uploaded to their YouTube channel.
It's very late, and I'm going to write about some ideas I got to Fran Bow to improve the red world, the bloody world. So
Killmonday has been on record stating that the Indiegogo funds were their only income until the game was finished, and if the games failed, they would have to move back with their families. Luckily for us, neither of the Martinsons were quitters. The story of Fran Bow had been cooking for some time, initially meant to be a stop-motion film in the vein of Coraline, with detailed dolls. She got 6 months into the project before the studio had a break-in which left all their props destroyed, forcing them to cancel the project, but it failed to snuff her flame. They had no intention of quitting. 2013 rolled around, then 2014, and finally 2015. August 27th, 2015 to be exact. The couple had a shared 2,000 kroner in their bank, which adjusted to exchange rates today is barely above 200 US dollars, which is shocking to hear and makes their story all the more endearing to me. In the summer of 2023, I had maybe $700 in my bank account, just enough for another month of rent and the bare essentials of food. I mixed free packets of mayo from fast food places with bowls of rice to increase the calorie count, just hoping beyond hope that my channel would pick up. So I understand that wild desperation and fear a creative person feels hoping their early work is able to keep them afloat for now. Fran Bow had to be a success, otherwise Killmonday Games would be no more. How did that end up working? Well... One of the most interesting parts of Fran Bow is that it was released with a chapter format that all came out at the same time, with 5 total and chapters 2 and 4 having 2 split parts. I honestly have no clue why 2 and 4 are 2-parters, but whatever. You know the game's gonna be good when the content warning list lists basically everything that could ever happen to a child. The game delivers exposition and chapter transitions through crude black and white art, imitating a child's drawing. We're introduced to Fran, a lonely 10-year-old girl who lives happily with her parents and her only friend, her cat, Mr. Midnight. On a Friday afternoon, she's under the watch of her Aunt Grace, whom she loves very much. Things seem picture perfect, until they aren't. She's visited in the night by a monster. Before she can even interpret what was in front of her, she rushes and finds the mutilated remains of her parents, with nothing but the murder weapon and a bloody pentagram left behind. Fran and Mr. Midnight attempt to flee the house from grief, but she passes out from exhaustion in the woods, where she's taken to a mental institution to be cared for. This whole segment has been a result of hypnotherapy conducted by her psychologist, Dr. Dearn. The game allows us a choice of responses during these conversations with other characters, but not in a branching dialogue manner. Our conversations with Dearn allow us to act out aggressively or passively, but it leads through the same core conversation. Typically your choices are just to continue the conversation or end it right there. It's very basic and somewhat lacking presentation-wise, but Fran has enough of a smart mouth to make up for it. She doesn't respond very well to Dearn's attempts to help her feelings, but she does calm down a little bit by receiving her mother's old purse as a gift from her aunt that acts as our inventory system, and our new prescription of a fictional medication called duotine. Okay, maybe taking that duotine was a bad idea. Fran Bow begins with a bang. Its opening 5 minutes covers a ton of ground with such a hopeless foundation. This young girl lost everyone in her life and is confined to a mental ward against her will, and the new medication she takes causes intense, Silent Hill-esque delusions. We instantly sympathize with this character and want her to make it out of this place in one piece so she can find her cat and try and live a happy life, which gears us up for our adventure immediately. We awake back in the mental ward, where we're able to finally explore at our own pace. If you thought being stuck in the asylum to begin with is bad, our patient chart reveals that we're in the tail end of World War II. You know, because asylums were running at full capacity and were always cleaned and didn't abuse patients whatsoever, of course. Fran's just lucky they aren't using electrotherapy. Yet. Also curious that the slaughtering of her family is considered a tragedy where details must be omitted. So clearly someone in charge here knows more, but won't tell us. There's small mercy and companionship, which Fran can find in limited capacities with the other troubled patients, like this boy here. Don't worry about that guy though. The asylum is filled with children who have experienced some of the worst things life has to offer, and it goes exactly where you think it goes. Each child has various coping mechanisms and personality traits manifested from the abuse and trauma they've endured, and it's depicted with astonishing sincerity. Different patients receive different forms of therapy, all with their own level of effectiveness. There's such a careful depiction of what such a broken child might say or act like during that point in their lives, and it's frighteningly sobering to read. It feels deeply personal, because it is. So much of what it was drawn from was personal experiences and stories from Natalia's life, and I absolutely felt it. Anyone who's experienced anything like this in their lives is bound to get dry in the mouth and have sweaty palms while they play. because I know I certainly did. Interacting with these characters in the environment shows us just how tragic poor Fran's situation is. The fact she's only 10 is wonderfully reflected by her not being able to fully comprehend the world around her, both the violent, bloody delusions she experiences, but also the very adult medical information and logical deductioning of the staff meant to treat her. She struggles to read cursive and is easily entertained by wooden horses and other toys. Her bed is full of drawings of Mr. Midnight, and that recurring monster. She stamps her feet whenever she's frustrated. There isn't a moment spared, reminding you of who you're playing as, and it's as charming as it is depressing. The picture of Fran with her family is safe in her purse, and we can look at it as much as we please to remind us of what we lost. Natalia's experience with animation is on full display. Fran is incredibly expressive and animated gorgeously. Her hair bounces and her body language communicates so much apprehension and fear and uncertainty. I love how this game looks to bits. Everyone is drawn with such a muted, dull color palette to scream how dry and unloving this world is. The environments are spooky and nearly derelict. The asylum, Oswald Asylum formerly, feels cold and unwelcoming to explore. The checkerboard floors and exposed brick walls make it feel like a place on its last legs that smells far too strongly of bleach. Bleach meant to hide the regularly spilled blood. Also, the only TV inside details a new broadcast that human testing is now legal. Testing what? We don't know. Probably whatever Burger King puts on their menu next. As far as point-and-click games go, Fran Bow is exceptionally simple. The mouse controls everything from navigating Fran, switching rooms with these eyeballs, clicking on interactable objects, which can be highlighted with the tab key, and interacting with items in your purse by examining them, using them in the overworld, and combining them. We need to escape this room and find the yellow door, which is the only way out of the asylum. Doing so requires you to snag a hook from the curtain and break it, which causes one of the nurses to leave the room to fix it. We can read some pages of how trauma causes children to become paranoid and not trust the world around them, some band-aids needed by another character, and find a code for a locked box containing our duotine. Deern told the nurses to never let us take it again, but our dream apparition of Mr. Midnight said it would be fine, so we're going to trust him and start popping these pills like they're candy. Alright, maybe that was a bad idea. Duotine is the game's core gimmick. Taking a pill allows us for our environment to warp into a delusional nightmare world filled with blood, dead animals, bugs, and these wispy shadow creatures. Messages written in blood are scrawled all over the walls and even are items from an unknown source, sometimes implicitly from Fran's own perspective. Fran tends to see herself dead a lot, which can only mean good things, of course. Beyond just an aesthetic change, the layout of these areas changed dramatically, with new routes being opened, while others available in the real world are now closed. The shadow creatures seem capable of some form of communication, and they speak a lot about human perception, which is a running theme throughout Oswald's. Tons of posters about touch, sight, scent, and hearing, so we're left to question our own senses. Also, they're all jerks.
You should kill yourself now!
These two aesthetics combined give Chapter 1 a real Arkham Asylum, a serious house on a serious Earth vibe. A bloody blend of gritty realism with macabre fantasy that explores mental illness through the lens of Alice in Wonderland, which is not just referenced, it's damn near a crossover with how close this game sticks to its interpretation, which is not a bad thing whatsoever. Swapping between these realities is the core mechanic involved with exploration and puzzle solving. Some items will only be obtainable in this nightmare world, while others in the real world. Swapping between them takes just over a second to do and is accompanied with enough of a dramatic sting to feel exciting each time you do it. Right off the bat, we're left to question if these pills are nothing more than delusions Fran experiences because of some potential psychoactive ingredient, or her fractured mental state, or some alternate reality. Because we can spy a conversation between Dr. Deern and Grace in the nightmare world with perfect clarity, but most NPCs vanish off the map entirely. You never know what you're going to see every time you take this pill, and I think it's a fantastic part of this game that gains quite a bit more meaning the more we play. Just wait and see. We're 20 minutes in and we've really filled up our unexplained entity list already, haven't we? But perhaps worse than the monsters in the nightmare world are the monsters in the asylum. We need that key from the guard, but the only way he'll give it to us is if we give him a kiss. What actually ends up happening is a fetch quest chain that involves spilling coffee on him to make him go away, but we're eventually able to get our key after swapping a bunch of items and talking to everyone in the asylum, especially this boy who would be king, who copes by acting like royalty after a horrific experience left him feeling worthless. The puzzles in the first chapter are incredibly reasonable and entry-level for an adventure game, and I don't think I looked at a guide once for chapter 1. I have completely given up and will not judge anyone whatsoever for using a guide in any adventure game, because when you play some of these, you genuinely lose a piece of your humanity and ability to deduce things logically. Trust me, the other day I tried to lure something from under my couch with a granola bar. I've lost my mind. We end up in the basement after falling through a vent and find more duotine. But there's another kind that's yellow instead of red. The note left inside the same box details how this patient is responding positively to duotine because their gland is expanded, with ectoplomatine reaching a high number, whatever that means. But the container had to be changed so it looked like the approved variant. So the duotine we've been taking might be a bad batch of sorts. And, of course, that patient is us. Well, don't worry about it, because we've got another encounter with the satanic monster, another trauma dream about Mr. Midnight, and we've only got a few rooms left to explore in Oswald's. The rooms where they keep the failed lobotomy patients, of course. Because it's the 1940s. Not sure what it word means, though. The duotine somehow allows us to pass through this room where a nurse is. It almost feels like we're going into another world that reflects our own versus just seeing delusions, because moving the key in the nightmare world affects the real world. One last puzzle to escape the asylum, and it was by far my least favorite of the whole chapter. This note is actually supposed to be a math question. You need to add the numerical value of each month to each number written down here for the 4-digit password, which isn't hard to do in your head, but I gotta be missing something really obvious that signifies it should be taken mathematically, because this was the only puzzle that stumped me for longer than a few minutes. Never change, adventure games. Our only way out is through the hedge maze by chasing this mechanical Mr. Midnight, which is actually a minigame we can play. Minigames usually show up between chapters to break the pace and have a very light arcade-esque challenge. And while none of them are outright bad, they do kind of feel like repurposed minigames Isaac learned when he learned how to program, just put in for fun sometimes. Most of our view is obscured by darkness, but all we have to do is just travel through the hedge maze and avoid the shadow creatures to reach the end. Pretty simple and doesn't overstay its welcome. There is an option to skip it in other minigames outright, but that's the coward's way out. You get a Steam achievement if you beat it. This mysterious narration tells us to trust robot cats, and that despite how threatening this new world of ours seems to be, there will always be a good side to it. We escape through a drainage pipe, but we drop the photograph of our family in the process, forcing us to leave it behind, bringing Chapter 1, My Sober Day, to a close. This was an exemplary opening chapter. The puzzles are tempered just right to make us explore, but still feel entirely fair to solve from a child's perspective. We're given one bloody vicious narrative hook, with a ton of unanswered questions left dangling. What really happened with our family? What's going on at Oswald's asylum? What's going on with duotine in the nightmare world? Is any of this even real? This chapter took me less than an hour to complete it and left me absolutely starving for answers. A really remarkable opening for an adventure game, perhaps one of the best I've ever seen. It's cinematic enough to work nearly as well as just a viewing experience. But a great introduction can sometimes overshadow everything if the stakes aren't raised and the breadcrumbs aren't followed. Luckily for Fran Bow, Killmonday is very well versed in their fairy tales, because this trail of breadcrumbs is leading to quite the spectacular house in the woods. But the candy isn't on the outside, it's what's inside that counts. The other end of the pipe leads us to a forest surrounding Oswald's asylum, full of discarded trash and toys from patients who are no longer being cared for, however you want to interpret that. We can see that reality has begun to break down a bit because we can meet a giant ant and pig-like bug creature without the use of duotine, which is questionable to say the least. Not only does he seem real, he talks too. He suggests that his bug pig, his only friend in this world, ate Mr. Midnight as he passed by, So we have to kill the pig to free the cat. But at the same time, Duotine allows us to see these floating head creatures tangled in the tree with a key. We need to unlock the door we're going to construct on the side of a well. They say a rat stole the brush for the sake of his own fur, so that's another creature we have to deal with so far. We're operating on Nightmare Realm rules by this point, so we're just gonna have to deal with it. We can't get the bug pig to stand still, and we don't have the brush to free the heads, but we can find the ant's house if we talk to him, which also houses a family of living pine cones, who have the blueberries we need for the beetle pig to stay still. But we can't get them because Pinecone Daddy won't let us. But we can knock over his baby son as many times as we like. The Nightmare Realm was beginning to show us somehow tamer versions of what we experience in the real world, which makes Fran's perspective even more questionable. Fantasy creatures are in the real world, but the Nightmare Realm has a dead exterminator covered in ants. It's morbid, but not exactly unrealistic. We can distract the ants with some steak and rummage through the bag for an expired ticket and a mousetrap to catch the Pinecone Daddy in. So we get the blueberries and slaughter the bug pig with the hatchet we found in the stump, only to find that inside was the rat. The same rat who stole the brush we need. We brush his fur, get the comb back to brush the floating head's hair to get the key. They turn into bugs, but don't worry about it. And unlock the door we made on the well to end the first part of the chapter. Obtaining all those items might seem insane, but it's incredibly straightforward with no moon logic to be found. It all follows the strange whimsy of a Brothers Grimm fable. There's always some clue around the corner on what item you need to distract another character with. Items are in areas where they make sense. It's not a huge reach in logic. There's a tender balance between an incredibly fair series of puzzles that implements the reality swapping seamlessly while fully immersing in the twisted fairy tale vibe that's only going to get crazier from here. We're told a couple times by this point that our cat might not be missing because he got lost, someone might have stolen him. And when we enter the door in the well, we're incapacitated by someone and wake up in someone else's house, like we're some kind of animal. This house is oddly pleasant, despite the circumstances of our arrival. There are sweet treats lying around, the fireplace is roaring, the wallpaper is inviting. Too bad it's filled with a ton of paintings of these creepy girls, some of which are conjoined down the middle while others aren't. One painting even depicts them holding Mr. Midnight. The house has an absurd amount of things to grab, from cooking items to ashes, even a knife, because all troubled child protagonists need a knife weapon. It's like a rite of passage. The house becomes far more depraved the more we explore. There's a severed corpse on the ground, a dead ringer for how Fran's own parents were killed, and the master bedroom is blood-soaked and filled with decapitated and severed dolls. Taking Duotine just puts us at the bottom of a well with a single puzzle to solve, which is honestly disappointing. I wish we got more of the house to explore like that, not some boring well with a rock tied to a stone we need to get free by placing a board on the ground and burning with a match. There is a reason why it's specifically a well, but we're not going to find that out for some time. The attic is where things really heat up. We find Mr. Midnight alive, but caged. Him being able to speak doesn't feel out of place in the slightest because even though the player has only formally met him through dreams and delusions, no one would question his undying love and fierce loyalty to Fran by this point. And we can see this through this beautiful interaction the two share while he's caged. It's obvious he's Fran's emotional support animal, and without him in her life, who knows what would happen. Also, there's a stitched-together baby in the attic. Leaving the attic, we can find a pair of conjoined twins at the dinner table, the occupants of the house, the precious being from the other world as they refer Fran as. These are Clara and Mia, conjoined teenagers who are holding Fran and her cat hostage because they need her for something. They trauma dump on Fran and reveal that they used to be merely identical twins, like not attached, but something appeared one night and decided the two should be stitched together forever, echoing how a monster appeared one night and killed Fran's parents. The various paintings of the twins around the house already hint that we can see Clara and Mia pre- and post-conjoining. The twins tell Fran that if she performs a certain ritual for them, they will free her and Mr. Midnight. The ritual requires a lot of shocking ingredients, but a toad we can speak to outside the window, which was unlocked by that skeleton guy again, reveals that we're far from the first person the twins have kept and forced to perform the ritual, which ends up going pretty poorly on their end. We're given an alternate recipe to follow, which is still kinda brutal, because it requires Fran to cut herself to drop blood in a churning pot on the stove. We need to create a pentagram on the miscolored floor, light black candles with our matches, and follow the recipe by brewing everything in a pot, which also requires a lock of the twins' hair, which you can only get by altering the OG recipe with the typewriter that's barely visible, which was kind of a sneaky bit, and otherwise very straightforward quest. We brew the potion and splash it on the sisters as they kneel on the pentagram, but this secret ritual was actually designed to redeem their souls. You know, by sucking them out of their mouths and reducing them to ash. Well, I guess we didn't really know what would happen when we performed the ritual, but they were holding us hostage, so I don't feel that bad. It turns out the key doesn't even unlock the cage. It unlocks a secret compartment in the master bedroom's mirror instead. After a slide puzzle, that is. Great. I love slide puzzles. They're my favorite. I swear, slide puzzles come right after making a centipede clone in every game design course you can find on sites like Udemy and Skillshare. I'm beyond sick of them. This is an easy puzzle, but I feel no satisfaction from solving it. Makes me wish I was in that damn ritual instead of the twins. But after we solve it, the mirror breaks and we find quite a bit more about the twins, like the fact they blame this it-word character for sewing them together. They seem to at least tolerate their situation enough to smile when we met them, but it turns out they utterly loathed each other to the core, which is the key reason why they wanted to be split up again. It seems like they were responsible for the death of their own mother as well, who was the corpse inside the house. Along the key we need to free our kitty with, we find a supply of yellow duotine as well, suggesting that the twins likely attended or were at least associated with Oswald's asylum at some point, possibly to treat them for their condition. A pair of skeletons rest at the bottom, and if those belong to the twins themselves, then who did we just talk to? Were the twins even real? Or was it just an apparition? Who else would those bones belong to? The sewn together baby is now the twins' favorite doll, which looks suspiciously like Tweek's mom from South Park, who also looks suspiciously like our own mother and our aunt. So the two of them are clearly identical twins as well, which does not bode well. Finally, Mr. Midnight is free and the two can share a genuinely happy moment where they don't have to be apart from one another any longer, and it fills the heart to the brim. Now all they have to do is find Aunt Grace, and the two can try and live the happiest possible life they can under their circumstances. The only way out is by giving the toad we've been talking to baking soda to make him inflate and play a Frogger clone. But I did that by complete accident. I thought baking soda would kill toads and frogs. Not that I've done that before. Every so often this game has a puzzle I complete by pure accident, and I'm completely baffled as to how I was supposed to guess that by intuition. We cross the lake and the toad gives us 2 items as a parting gift: the recovered photo of our family and a book written by someone named Leon Castillo. Are you prepared for an insane info dump? Because you're about to get one right now. Yeah, insane is kind of understating it. It rapid fires a ton of concepts very quickly with no breathing room. But just bear with me here. The year is 1908 and Leon is writing this in his 90s. He retrospectively writes about how he was always a curious man and talked to things that normally could never talk back, like flowers and animals. Sound like anyone we know? He details seeing these black shadow creatures and messages scrawled onto the walls. He sees a creature with a goat skull for a head and explains that it's Remor, the Prince of Darkness from the 5th dimension. If it wasn't blatant enough, that's the monster hunting Fran, and now it has a name. Castillo sees dead versions of himself, voices telling him to die. Castillo gives a name to the shadow creatures, Kamalas. Beings that feed off of human suffering and fear, normally invisible to the human eye, that seem capable of possessing human bodies, with their only weakness being water, When exposed to enough water, the Kamalas seem to transform into another creature entirely, Valoka, a being of light instead of darkness that frequent a realm called Ithursta. Castillo theorizes that if Remor is from the 5th dimension, there must be 4 more we can't perceive, with this handy drawn diagram suggesting that each dimension is laid over top of another, but not always overlapping, like one could theoretically just jump up and down these levels. Yet another creature appears before Castillo, a giant flying axolotl that holds pink liquid that can heal wounds and cause nature to bloom. He dreams of black cats with yellow eyes, giant vegetable people in Ithursta who had their own language and numerical system, which he partially transcribed in this diary. Somehow Castillo went to Ithursta and met its king, Zaire, and learned that it was the second reality, and it seems to look like a pretty peaceful place. Apparently, our world of humanity is the 3rd realm, the place of consciousness and free will. Death is merely when things stop vibrating, and only exists in the 3rd and 4th realm. The 5 realms of essential existence, free, is how these realms or dimensions are defined, and Castillo was held by something called Mabuka, the Mother of Darkness, and doesn't look like he's having a rockstar time. This whole journey of his is very psychedelic and deals with a shocking amount of metaphysics, with string theory being applied to traveling between realities normally imperceptible by people. Creatures and beings exist beyond the human realm, like the Luciferns, these floating head creatures that turn into dragonflies. Did you get all that? Yeah, I was kind of floored reading all of it. Not only were there a lot of things recontextualized from Chapter 1, but this gigantic tome of arcane knowledge comes out of nowhere and throws a million plates in the air and does not care if we catch any of them. This is an optional read that can be read later on, but wow, this lays a ton of groundwork for the entire game onwards. It's like listening to a friend's hyperfixation on a topic you know nothing about. It's overwhelming in a way that stokes your curiosity. A true dessert after this 3-course meal of a chapter. It's like reading the Necronomicon, just oodles of information that normal people could never perceive about the nature of existence and consciousness. The fictional author of the Necronomicon and the Lovecraft mythos was suddenly ripped apart by what was described as an invisible beast, echoing how Remor cloaks himself from the 3rd reality and slaughters people how he pleases while remaining undetected. Though I can totally see how people would get bored with this 10-minute info dump just right at the end of a chapter. I don't think it's for everyone, but I liked it. And even past this massive info dump, there's still more to come. We need to cross a chasm to try and find home, but Remor appears and breaks the makeshift bridge, sending Fran and Mr. Midnight spiraling down, down, down. Another trauma sequence appears with Aunt Grace dropping Fran off at Oswald's, but despite her pleas, there's some unknown purpose past just getting better that Grace won't tell us about. I really felt the desperation and utter despair Fran was feeling as she cried blood out of sheer isolation, with no one to comfort her. Somehow we still haven't finished the chapter because Fran wakes up as a tree with no arms and no legs, just a face on a wooden stump, which is horrifying. There's a brief segment where we play as Mr. Midnight to help Fran, but she's whisked away by some talking vegetable people on a flying boat, which finally brings a close to Chapter 2, Curiosity Symptoms and Double Personality. Talk about ending on a literal cliffhanger, jeez. I broke up the recordings of each chapter into chunks to make it easier to edit, but I was so enthralled by this point that I forgot to do that for Chapter 3. I don't think it's as tight as Chapter 1 atmospherically, but Chapter 2 is a great follow-up that does its own thing. Beautiful. We're brought before Zaire, whom we know is the king of Ithursta from Leon's diary. How exactly we got here is ambiguous, and since we saw Fran fall from a huge height, it's really up to you if you want to go with the idea that the game so far is some kind of ultimate delusion taking place inside of her head, or if Ithursta is a real place, or both, or she just died. Zaire takes special interest in us and empathizes with our desire to just go home, so he hands us off to the axolotl from the diary, named Pelantris. In order to grow some limbs, we must bathe in that healing pink substance, which is actually the ever-flowing blood of the slain King of Light from the first reality, Velocus, who died from battle with the darkness. Okay. Pelantris says something that really skews the interpretation of events in favor of a coma theory at play. He says that Fran turned into a tree to keep herself alive because she had such a strong will to live. Combine that with Pelantris identifying as a doctor, however she slipped into a coma doesn't really matter. Things aren't looking up for Fran at the moment. Perhaps falling did this to her? But what about all the fantasy nonsense of Chapter 2 prior? Was Leon's sophisticated journal allegedly written decades before Fran ever existed? Or is it also just a figment of her imagination? The chapter's name really does point to Fran being in a coma of sorts, with Ithursta being a realm of imagination, at least for now. Fran spends the rest of Chapter 3 as a kind of tree creature or ent or whatever, and she's also missing her pills, which means no more Nightmare Realm for now. By this point, it was getting increasingly clear that duotene has something to do with these 5 realms somehow. I just can't prove it yet. There's a pretty clear light v darkness motif mentioned very heavily from this point onwards, with darkness being a tangible substance associated with evil. Remor's head is intentionally meant to evoke depictions of the devil himself, likely because that's how Fran might picture him. The light is the side of good, made of colorful and friendly anthropomorphic creatures like trees and animals and vegetables. Part of what makes the theory that everything is happening in Fran's head so compelling is that the extra realities all seem like something a child would dream up on their own, and this train of thought is rewarded when you finally get to explore Ithursta. It's such a serene, gentle kingdom that blends nature within a very medieval countryside attraction feel to it. The bug residents of this place are incredibly laid back, friendly, and are in no rush to get anything done because time doesn't flow linearly here. Time in the third reality, the realm of man, has past, present, and future. In Ithursta, time is relative, so it all kind of overlaps. Rather than verbally explaining, we're given a chance to explore that for ourselves when we're handed a clock that has the ability to change the seasons with every click, which offers a similar environmental change like duotene, but much less horrifying and a lot prettier. The unorthodox flow of time in Ithursta is demonstrated by winter forcing everyone inside, rainfall coming and going, lakes being accessible during certain seasons, and more. It's such a fun mechanic that is beautifully built from what came before. Ithursta was foreshadowed even before the diary. Remember the giant ant in Chapter 2? That's where he's from. He was a famous jazz player here. We find out that when a resident reaches old age, they often leave and go to see other dimensions, which is probably what the ant was doing in the third reality. Our task is to find a great wizard that lives on a mountaintop in the wintertime so we can become human and go home. Doing so requires another ritual that involves scouring the kingdom looking for items, which of course requires our ability to flicker through the seasons to find items in areas accessible. But it is pushed further than duotene, sometimes stretched a bit thin in my opinion. There's one section where you need to obtain shoes from this dancer by getting into a club of sorts, only accessible for 2 seasons, and if you use that exterminator ticket with the crayon to create yourself some ID to get inside, which is already kind of a logical leap, but whatever. Switching the clock to winter kicks you out right away, but you need to set it to spring to have the club empty to mess with the metronome so he kicks them off. But summer has some cockroaches fix the piano to undo that, so you need to double tap it to fast forward past summer and right into fall to get the shoes. It's not an absurd thing to ask for the player to figure out, but I don't recall ever seeing any suggestions that you could mash the button to switch multiple times, especially since there's already a buffer between switching seasons. Maybe it's just a me thing, whatever. I would argue that Chapter 3's puzzles are the most complicated in the entire game, surpassing the later ones because not only are we sent on such a huge fetch quest for countless items that all have to be found and obtained in all sorts of obtuse ways, some of them require you to memorize basic alien numerology, like in a library. It's definitely lacking in the story department because it begins with the arrival to Ithursta and ends with your exit. so it feels like a giant detour. But there are some interesting delusions to pick up on. One of them details Fran's guilt about killing the twins, showing a version of herself thrown off a cliff out of remorse, and another showing this Elizabeth Bathory-esque figure calling everyone a traitor as she kills a version of Mr. Midnight. I thought this was supposed to be Fran at first, but there's actually another character it could be. Aunt Grace. Hear me out. If she's to be taken at face value, she's not her mother because she refers to Fran's mom as another person, and perhaps Fran could manifest a sense of guilt and a delusion of herself as an evil queen killing her only friend, but Grace is incredibly sketchy for leaving Fran in such a nuthouse, and she's her only legal guardian by this point, so just think about it for now. Speaking of Mr. Midnight, I was honestly kind of disappointed by how little he had to say. Sometimes he can offer some advice for a puzzle, but most of the time he just has one line of dialogue when he isn't speaking in a cutscene reminding us of our primary objective. I was really hoping he would cycle through a list of catty comments. I wouldn't doubt his devotion to Fran, but I feel like it would have made for a more interesting dynamic if he was a little bit more standoffish or ran his mouth or something, like a Jack and Daxter kind of situation. Actually, those characters are more alike than I thought. Also, we were given some kind of box from Palantris, but I forgot to record that. Since I haven't mentioned it much yet, I wanted to talk about the audio-visual experience of Fran Bow. The music was composed entirely by Isaac. It's not my favorite soundtrack. It's primarily an ambient collection and does a lot to stay out of your way and fit the mood, which it does exceptionally well. The Asylum, Ithursta, everything in between have fitting tracks that accentuate that feeling of being lost as a child. But something about it never really jumped at me. I'm certainly not saying it's bad, far from it. I just don't think it's one that entirely compares to its cohorts like the Cat Lady. The sound design within the UI is lacking in my opinion. Rummaging through your inventory has enough shuffling and metal clinking sound effects to feel natural, but dialogue and buttons within the menu interactions during these dialogues are completely silent. I'm not suggesting it needs full voice acting to be considered good, maybe I'm spoiled, but it was just kind of awkward to read a 5-minute conversation with only the looping ambient track playing and nothing to punctuate the dialogue, like a Paper Mario text sound effect or something. Let me compare here. Which version do you prefer? By no means am I an audio engineer or a game designer, but some auditory feedback would be cool. Fran Bow has a kind of amateurish charm to it, and I mean that in a positive sense. I think there's something wonderful about a company's first game blowing up like this and being as good as it is, because it offers a ton of opportunities to compare with whatever they make next, which Killmonday is very aware of because their next title was exceptionally more polished production-wise. I like seeing the flaws and trials and tribulations that went into making this game. It makes the company and the product itself feel more tangible and relatable, kind of human in a way. We're eventually able to turn back into a human and able to get to a portal back to our own reality and find our way home. Chapter 3 was definitely a detour, but it's been the only part of the journey that's made Fran happy whatsoever, really. It's such a nice place that she could even live there. The first part of Chapter 4, My Imaginary Friend, begins with a bang because Fran points out that the gap they fell through at the end of the second chapter is now filled with water, which wasn't the case prior. But it's still definitely the same area as before. So, was Fran gone for such a long time that it filled with water as the seasons changed? Or should we not trust one of these interpretations of events? It's been a while since she took any duotine, so maybe her mind is clearer now. We try to find our jar of pills again, but someone's clearly leading us into a trap with it. But not to worry, because it was Itward who trapped us, who introduces himself as a faithful friend. He strongly implies that he was the one sending us odd dreams that lead us to Mr. Midnight. But when Fran accuses him of being involved with the twins in Chapter 2, he denies it and claims that they only pinned the blame on him to dissociate the fact of what their family did to them, and he leaves it at that. I came to you as you imagined me, but I'm not imaginary. I'm part of your reality. Is a very odd thing to say. We've seen Itward mentioned in glimpses of him from Chapter 1, but he's always been a guide for us to escape and find our kitty. But now we're meeting him formally, and he promises that he'll be able to take us home. Despite how much he looks like one of Slender Man's long-lost relatives, Itward is a very gentle and kind creature of the night, and his intentions seem genuine. How can you operate a machine like this and not be full of whimsy? Well, he does encourage us to keep taking duotine, so maybe we should be a little apprehensive of fully trusting him for now. He knows far more than he lets on, but wants Fran to find the answers for herself when the time is right, which frustrates her, but she begrudgingly understands. There are things that will only make sense when she gets older, which is actually right around the corner. It's entirely possible that Itward is some kind of amalgamation of an imaginary friend Fran had, hence the title of the chapter's first part, but also something that clearly exists outside of Fran's mind, because the twins knew about him, unless the twins are also figments of Fran's mind. Once the clock hits 2:35, we fetch a pail of water and some fire berries to power his flying machine, which can be done with one shake of a lamb's tail apparently. Itward has a real macabre Dr. Seuss sensibility to him, where his sincerity and ghoulish appearance contrast to make an incredibly memorable character. I can easily see this guy as a tattoo design that transcends this game's popularity. Kinda wish he spoke in rhymes to maximize the vibe, though. The puzzles inside the flying machine range from clever to please God in my suffering. Any puzzle that requires chemistry makes me wish I was institutionalized at Oswald. This isn't a hard puzzle at all, but all the extra pipes you need are really goddamn small and blended in the background. It's easy to miss them entirely and just wander around cluelessly for way too long. I also found it weird you can overwrite chemicals and you don't have to empty the beakers or flasks if you fill them with the wrong ingredient. Whatever. The later puzzles are thankfully more entertaining, but still tickle your brain. You have to crack open a safe by examining and then memorizing these numbered notes first in the real world, and then the nightmare world. And for some reason there's a robot rabbit. There is a ton of incredibly illuminating information aboard. We can find this kind of shadow puppet performance, presumably made by Itward himself, that goes into depth about the twins. Mia was always angry, and Clara was always sad, and the two loathed each other like we already knew. Itward appeared to them only in dreams, and eventually in reality to mend their emotional wounds and give them both a friend. But they rejected his companionship and tried to kill him, but only succeeded in killing each other? Okay. They were sewn together because they wanted to see if they could. Whomever they is left vague, but Itward appears one final time and offers them a second chance to understand and love each other, till a black cat goes missing and the well's magic door is unlocked, that is. The last stanza is clearly a reference to Chapter 2 with Mr. Midnight and the door we made on the well to find the twins. So they were just biding their time until Fran came along, but the twins were trying to kill Itward because they blamed him for their misery and eventual mutilation. But the fact they apparently killed each other and a well is where their possibly imaginary house is pointing that the twins are dead in the third dimension, and their corpses were likely thrown into a well. We already know that Oswald was performing lobotomies on patients, so sewing twins together isn't that far off. But we're a long way from there. The duotine hallucinations are at their peak, with inflicting deep personal wounds on Fran. We can see Clara and Mia separated, haunting Fran's guilty conscience with false smiles. We see Itward turned into a clown, which really activated my almonds because I remembered all those clown paintings in the asylum, so there's clearly a connection there. Itward is a kind of guardian and friend to mistreated children, like Fran and the twins, and it's honestly adorable. We also finally get a proper name to our nightmare realm, Ultra Reality. Our exposure to duotine allows us to access it, but it isn't a dimension on its own. It's a kind of in-between limbo-like area where the dimensions overlap and bleed into each other, which is why the third dimension beings get so corrupted and warped. We aren't fully stepping into other realms with the pills, but sort of matching them. We've explored Athirsta, which is the second realm, which leaves 1, 4, and 5 unexplored. And if I had to guess, all the nightmare visions and blood and death probably comes from realm number 5. All of these realities overlap, so we can see the Kamalas and other beings now that Fran has enhanced her senses to detect these new realities all happening at once, where time moves differently. Pandora is where man lives, the realm of defining things, which makes them real to us. The other realms operate kind of nonsensically, with time operating in ways we don't understand because these are not realms of sense, but sensation. Human consciousness takes form there, which is why Fran is seeing specific delusions relating to her intimate personal life. If you were taking duotine, you would probably be getting your own trauma flashbacks brought to life. Itward decides to pull a devious lick when he locks us in a room and snatches Mr. Midnight for seemingly no reason. I solved that puzzle so fast, and I was seeing nothing but red, and I was so ready to punch through my monitor at his betrayal. But it was all for naught because it was a clever ruse to celebrate Fran's 11th birthday, actually. It's a really tender moment between these three characters, and Fran even gets a birthday gift. A black cat toy with a hidden compartment. Our joyous occasion is ruined because we're being attacked by Kamalas, and we're finally given a real chance to use their weaknesses of water against them with some simple but satisfying puzzles. But we're too late. The flying machine is fated to crash, and we have to bid Itward farewell. For now. Another trauma segment shows what Itward is like as our imaginary friend, reading stories and basking in loving companionship with the world's loneliest girl. Everyone could use a friend like Itward. Doctor's prescription is the second half of this chapter, and thankfully, Fran and Mr. Midnight survive. There's no sign of Itward or the flying machine, but they've crashed right around the corner from Fran's home. Our journey is almost over, but Fran can't help but feel miserable. She wanted to go home so bad. But now that she had properly met Itward and explored Athirsta, she's having doubts. Maybe the journey she experienced was her true home, and the beings she met her found family. Perhaps her physical home now is nothing more than a remnant of her older life with nothing but ghosts inside. Our front door is locked, so we send Mr. Midnight in to unlock it, but Dr. Deern pulls up just as we're alone, intending to find Grace, but instead delivers more than a couple truth nukes as he forces us inside the car. He claims that Mr. Midnight went missing forever ago and is likely dead, and that he needs to essentially abduct us for an unknown purpose, leaving our kitty behind and annihilating our journey to get back home in a single moment. You may think Deern is here to drive us back to the asylum, but things get interesting when he says he was fired for knowing too much. He's stolen a couple documents from the asylum, and reading them reveals that Fran is apparently dead, found frozen to death in the woods after she found her parents murdered, all signed off by Aunt Grace. It's pretty strange, considering Fran is right here and we're playing as her. Deern agrees that these news reports are incredibly suspicious, but that's just the start. He confirms that the duotine we were given was a new variant with a shocking level of ectoplomatine, which creates a door between the conscious and subconscious, which causes Fran's mind to alter so profoundly that her consciousness can perceive things that seemingly aren't even there. The difference between Fran and Deern is that Fran believes everything she's seen is real to some extent, but Deern writes it all off as delusions created by the medication. This is a very long and awkward car ride that makes Fran's entire adventure feel silly, and like nothing that happened even mattered. Like we were just a child out of her mind who made up this entire adventure as a coping mechanism. Fran thinks Remor in the darkness is behind everything, but Deern is now fully suspecting the nurses and Dr. Oswald, fully dedicated to finding out the truth of Fran's family tragedy and what's going on at the asylum. Dr. Deern is actually a pretty good guy. He was just a psychologist working in the 1940s loony bin, which is kind of a low bar, but indeed a bar, at least compared to doctors performing lobotomies, that is. A sudden shift into ultra-reality reveals part of Deern's traumatic past to Fran, which shakes him, but he tries not to think that part of Fran's delusions might be real. Deern confirms that Clara and Mia were real people previously institutionalized who kept making claims of seeing a creature named Edward. Itward. Right. The twins were sewn together, then they died, then they got thrown into a well. Dr. Oswald, founder of the asylum, did it to see what would happen. And what happened is they died. Which sounds crazy, but anything could happen in the 1940s, especially in the field of medical science. Deern takes her to a graveyard because we're gonna dig up her family to confirm something. Seems like a horrific thing to subject a child to, especially if you're a children's psychologist, but whatever. After some very brief puzzles where we meet some pinecone creatures in the third realm somehow, we get some shovels and dig up the Bow Dagenhart family, which includes a grave for Fran herself. No one actually knows who killed her family, and that's what we're trying to find out. I feel like this game has a weird thing for incredibly minor puzzles placed at the very end of each chapter. Like, just when you think there's only story and maybe the minigame, there's a wait, one more thing you have to do kind of puzzle that's incredibly easy and feels oddly out of place with the narrative having such a definitive sense of ending for each chapter. Like, why are we going through this whole rigmarole of finding shovels to begin with? Also, instead of the minigame being here, it was actually an Itward ship. Fran's ruminations on her mother and father are genuinely heartbreaking. She never really had a chance to say goodbye because she fled the scene so quickly, but now she has to finally accept the two of them are gone forever. Never to live, laugh, or love, they're just rotting corpses now. It's a brief but beautiful moment that stings to read. There's 3 graves. We open our father's grave, then our mother's, then ours. But that coffin has the bones of a cat, which brings more questions than answers. Perhaps that's the real body of Mr. Midnight. And what have we been interacting with this whole time has been a delusion of another realm? But who the hell would go out of their way to bury her cat? The law, or at least the asylum feeding the law of the story, has clearly been lying about Fran being dead and buried her cat instead. Or possibly another cat? Everyone is kind of busy with the Second World War, so I get why there isn't much focus on an individual family massacre, but there's no denying it. There's a full-blown conspiracy happening at Oswald's that we're just a single part of. It's been happening for years before us, but now we've got Dr. Deern on our side to help stop it. We spent so long daydreaming and avoiding our problems that the real evil was blind to us the whole time. Well, maybe that's not the case. The chapter ends with Remor not only appearing, but taking Dr. Deern away and transporting us to the House of Madness, the 5th reality. Fran's completely alone with no one to help her, and Remor feeds on her misery like it's a chocolate cheesecake. What a merciless sense of finality the second half of Chapter 4 has. Being split up into 2 parts is kind of weird because the first part has basically all the puzzles, while the second was a borderline visual novel, but altogether there was an excellent blend of story revelation and puzzle progression. All of our chips are on the table now. Questions we previously wrote off have been expanded into something far more sinister. We got so caught up in the fantastical worlds we forgot to question the real one, which is exactly what this game predicted we would do, so it decided to remind us of the world Fran has to deal with, but sprucing it up with the whimsical bleeding into it and affecting the non-believers. And now we've got to prepare for our final chapter. Turns out the House of Madness is actually our house, subtle as always. We awake in our bed, chained to it, but still in our bed anyways. We finally get to meet Aunt Grace, and as you probably suspected, she's not entirely looking out for our best interests. She claims our cat killed her sister and our dad, just like the delusion implied back in Chapter 3. She does acknowledge that she's talking out of her ass, but just wants something to blame for their murder, but she phrases it in a very accusatory way. Talking about taking responsibility for one's actions does kind of imply that Grace thinks Fran might have killed her own parents. But why? She seemed to genuinely love them, but she may not have been in control of her actions at the time if we remember the stories of Kamala's possessing people. We're left locked to our bed as Grace leaves and the door vanishes from our room, leaving us alone in our room to ruminate. Sorry, I had to. Been in a real punny mood this whole script. We have our purse, but the only thing that will free us is Fran. Specifically Fran from the past, who claims that the only way to enter ultra reality is to break all of your senses, because normal human senses just won't do. How do you lose all your senses? Well, death is a good start, but sleeping is the sister to death. So that could be more evidence that Fran's experiencing a coma theory creepypasta. It's hard to determine if any moments of standard reality are actually happening, but more on that later. Fran being so young in Oswald's also contradicts what we're led to believe, that she was only admitted at 10 years old after her family's murder. She seems much younger here, and she's aware of Itward and the Kamalas, but doesn't recognize Mr. Midnight. So either this is a past event, or we're seeing another reality entirely play out. Regardless, once young Fran frees us, we're back in our room. We're given instructions to open Pelantris's box, and we find a cat-shaped key, and instructions on how to make something called the ECOG clock, which will awaken Makuba, the Mother of Darkness, so we can escape. From the moment we use that cat key on the toy we got from Itward, the true House of Madness reveals itself. It looks like an M.C. Escher painting with a dollhouse aesthetic, closely resembling the dollhouse seen in Fran's very own room, with what looks like her own eye poking through the crack as it floats suspended in space. From here, we need to gradually unlock rooms by finding 4 keys and repeatedly traveling between each area to look for clues on where to use each item. Our bedroom has a button from a dress we can cut off and various things in the dollhouse we can use, while we have to travel to snag some soap from a boy who scrubbed himself so aggressively his skin is peeling, an all-seeing eye creature who can see the past, present, and future, a giant mechanical cat, living trees, and more. The 5th reality does an excellent job at communicating the madness of Fran's fragile mind. Things the player has just experienced throughout the adventure are proverbially bolted together with random bits of nonsense that feel just whimsical enough to act like they were conjured from the mind of a child, but splashed in with telltale violence. The boy in the bathtub and having to rip out a talking skull's teeth to receive a key remind us of what game we're playing quite well. That clock needs a ton of items, and we have no duotine to swap between the realms, so you best keep your wits about you and give absolutely every area a double check. You're going to need it. Once we've gathered everything we need, we can assemble the clock from the back of the giant cat and enter room 103, where Makuba rests. She's a mask on the wall surrounded by vicious animals and skulls, and she's none too pleased we woke her from her slumber, though she does tell us something very interesting. Because of our duotine intake, we've been selected as Keeper of the Key by the Free in accordance with an ancient prophecy, which Makuba knows quite well, being the primordial darkness and all. She says that the Keeper will be hunted by the Son of Darkness after feeding from the Red Seed, and Remor is that Son of Darkness, and our Red Seed is definitely duotine. In a rare act of mercy, Makuba opens her literal Heart of Darkness to have Fran find the answers for herself, which leads us to a waiting room. We're given a ticket that tells us we're 7th in line. Seems reasonable enough to wait, but of course the wait times are absurd and the beings in front of us have waited weeks and even months to be seen by a doctor. I guess the Heart of Darkness is a Canadian hospital. We have to talk to the guy with the 2nd ticket who wants a bottle of tears, so we have to visit the eye guy again and cry to get those tears, give the weirdo the bottle to swap tickets, show the receptionist who tells us we'd never set up an appointment, run all the way up to call the number on the card she gave us on that phone, then go inside and skip the line now that everything's registered. Did that sound annoying? Because it was. I laughed for maybe 5 seconds when all that buildup was leading to a waiting room gag. But this is technically the final puzzle. That's it. We're at the end of the game here. Is that really the note it wants to go out on? A waiting room gag that almost intentionally seems to waste your time? I'm not that upset that this 15-minute gag exists. I'm more just irked that there seems to be such a deliberate monkey wrench thrown into a game with such rockstar pacing, one of its strongest aspects. Every chapter begins and ends with a hook to keep you interested. New ideas are carefully placed throughout and answered quickly enough to never break your pace or immersion. But it is an adventure game. It wouldn't be one without some kind of pointless detour, and I can't entirely hate it for that reason. On the other side of the door is actually Remor, the Prince of Darkness. But finally, he stops running away. Fran blames him for the death of her parents, but remember, the human senses aren't always to be trusted, and all Fran has as evidence is a brief glimpse. Your body is easy to corrupt, he says as he shows us a vision of what may have happened all along, Fran killing her parents herself. We have several ways to interpret the scene. 1, it's a complete fabrication from Remor. 2, this is exactly what we're seeing, Fran killing her own family gleefully. And 3, it's Fran, but not entirely her. She's being possessed. We aren't given any answers or time to really think about it because Fran awakes back where she was, but shares no introspection. It's like she's given up entirely out of mental exhaustion and no longer wants to find the truth, either out of guilt or being so strained that she just gave up. Down the hall is an incapacitated Dr. Deern strapped to an electric chair, which we can activate if we feel like it. Mr. Midnight is also there, but curiously, he's no longer capable of speaking, an effect of the Fifth Realm, Fran surmises. The only way to wake Deern up is by injecting this red substance into him, more than likely duotine. But just a moment later, Aunt Grace and Dr. Oswald himself are on the scene, neither of them even pretending to be interested in Fran's well-being. Get ready for our last info dump of the game, and this one's a doozy. Dr. Oswald knows everything about Fran, not just because she was a patient at his asylum, but because he's intimately familiar with Grace and Lucia, Fran's mother. The two were part of his experiments on twins, with Grace growing close enough to the doctor to become his right-hand woman. Oswald knows what Remor is, but claims he's a manifestation of Fran's own feelings, and that the bloody knife that sliced up her family was indeed gripped by her own hand. The experiments went so far that when Lucia met Fran's father, they knew the eventual child will be exceptional somehow. But Lucia went against Grace and the doctor's orders and tried to raise Fran as a normal girl, away from Oswald and his barbaric studies. Grace, now being the only guardian she has, throws Mr. Midnight off a cliff and tries to persuade Fran into having more tests run on her, which she doesn't take well, to put it lightly. Fran tries to kill her outright by strangulation, but Oswald just shoots her in the chest and lets her bleed out, because he only needs her brain to finish whatever experiment he was planning. Deern comes to and is horrified, but genuinely out of nowhere, it appears, Force pushes Dr. Oswald and Grace off screen, while Palantris comes with a once again able to speak Mr. Midnight, may I add, and revives Fran to full health. Deern can fully see these characters and is flabbergasted by all of this, but is quickly overwhelmed and does that eye bleeding thing whenever Fran does when she passes out. They're able to save his life, but only if they erase his memories of the entire event, Fran included, which she reluctantly accepts. The game ends with the four flying off into the sunset, finally unburdened by guilt and misery, for an immensely bittersweet and incredibly out-of-nowhere ending. The end. Was that a lot to take in? Yeah, it was. The ending isn't exactly what I would call mind-bending, but it's getting there. In typical Fran Bow fashion, our questions are met with even more devious questions. I didn't feel comfortable believing that everything that happened in the game was a pure delusion, or if it was entirely real and just filtered through Fran's mind. So I felt like someone just threw a glass tapestry at me and told me to put it back together again to find the true answers, which might be effective depending on the person. I know people who adore this bittersweet ending, but also people who criticized it for being incredibly vague and not answering their primary questions, with some going so far as to write the whole game off as pretentious nonsense that's deep as a puddle that has no interest in telling a coherent story, but just confusing you into thinking something profound is happening. And I'm honestly somewhere in the middle. I loved what I saw, and I firmly believe I understood the broad strokes of this narrative, but I feel like the deliberate effort to be confusing and spark debate amongst fans sort of muddies the smaller, fine details of what could have been an otherwise impeccable Silent Hill-esque story. I beat this game in 2 days, and it was a superbly thrilling 6.5 hours, but while I hammered away at writing this script by watching all my footage, the gears in my head began to turn. I've recapped and explained little bits and pieces of the story, analyzed little kernels of information and picked apart Fran's mind just a tad, but there still exists a laundry list of questions floating above our head like an epitaph on a gravestone. And the most important amongst them is, what is Fran Bow actually about? It throws concepts like string theory, the truth behind human consciousnesses, medical practices in the 1940s, and so much more into a puzzle box, and asks a frazzled, delusional 10-year-old to solve it. And her ability to do so is questionable at best. This wasn't a mistake or a flaw in the game design, that's it working as intended. If you've kept up with me for this long, then prepare, because I fully intend to answer the question of what is Fran Bow actually about with all of my ability, because when you poke your head into the rabbit hole, those rabbits are usually dead. Remember our opening scene? Fran receives Mr. Midnight as a gift, spots Remor, and then her parents are killed and she's whisked away to Oswald's. Knowing what we know now, this scene is the inciting incident of Fran's story, but it's a footnote in the greater narrative at play. Aunt Grace is absolutely not to be trusted, since she was in cohorts with Oswald the whole time. But what of Remor's appearance? Since it's said that he clearly appears before already troubled children and has the ability to prey on their weakness and possess them, I believe it's quite clear what happened, because we see it play out with our own eyes. Remor possessed Fran and made her kill her own parents. Fran's existence is part of some experiment involving Oswald, and he verbally mentions Remor, but these series of events can be interpreted with vast differences. Either this is all true and Remor exists and possessed Fran and made her do that, either from his own cruelty or out of some agreement with Oswald, or Remor is a figment of Fran's mind and she did that herself for some reason and can't cope with her own guilt. But what about her cat, Mr. Midnight? It's said to be dead towards the tail end of the game, and we do see a cat skeleton inside of a gravestone, but we're also accompanied by him nearly the entire adventure. He is capable of speaking, and I think it's glaringly evident that the cat we follow isn't the original one we were gifted, but a psychopomp created from Fran's mind that can only interact with her in the ultra reality. He is the Virgil to Fran's Dante, guiding her dutifully for her journey home, but not the home she previously had. Grace throwing the cat off a cliff in the fifth reality is a very puzzling scene, because it wouldn't surprise me if that's an abstraction of how the real Mr. Midnight died, but it occurs at the final scene of the game, which calls into question if this is actually a linear journey we're viewing. Grace seems to be one of the people abducting Fran, along with another male. It can't be Oswald, since he's wheelchair-bound, so perhaps Deern, who is ignorant to the greater experiments, or it was just some orderly. Fran's death was fabricated by the asylum, showing that they had no plans to release her. But what were their plans? Dr. Deern just works there normally. He is actually trying to help Fran, and presumably more children, and can be ruled out as anything more than just a doctor following orders. Oswald and Grace's experiments involve exposing patients to ectoplomatine, a chemical that messes with the brain's pineal gland, a small part of the brain that controls certain chemicals like melatonin to make you sleep. In some amphibians, it also helps them perceive light. In a lot of science fiction work, the pineal gland is often capable of far more. It's often treated like a kind of third eye that allows the human mind to perceive things differently, like different forms of reality. Fran isn't the only child that's being experimented on. Phil from Chapter 1 knows who Remor is, after all. Fran's escape from the asylum is incredibly questionable. Remor is there during major transitional points throughout the game, and a ton of what Fran experiences has direct or symbolic ties to her asylum time. Remember the boy who believes himself to be king? He sends us on a fetch quest for a bunch of items needed to escape the asylum. And remember Zaire, the king of Ithursta, who sends us on a fetch quest needed to escape the realm. What about the twins, Mia and Clara? They were real people in the asylum who took duotine. We know Oswald liked to experiment on twins because he did so in some regard with Grace and Lucia, Fran's mother. So Oswald decided to sew Clara and Mia together and then they died. It's entirely possible Fran pieced together an adventure featuring the two from what she heard from her time at Oswald's, but remember what she told herself. Death is just a state of mind, and the twins had been exposed to duotine. In Chapter 4, when Itward's play explains the twins in more depth, what actually happened is that when they died, Itward gave them another chance by sending their consciousnesses to another realm, allowing them to find some kind of peace after their death in Realm 3. This didn't end up going so well, but it explains how the twins are dead, but also alive. The validity of chapters 2, 3, and 4 are really puzzling because of how much they rely on characters who are dead in events that have already happened, just cycled through Fran in the alleged journal of Leon. What's up with Leon anyways? Look at this photo. I didn't even find it until I finished the game afterwards, but it's incredibly third eye opening. It shows the staff at Oswald's, the twins as babies, our mother and aunt as children, and Leon, revealed to be a previous doctor at Oswald's. Given the fact that Fran is 10, I doubt she was able to fabricate something as complicated and wordy as Leon's diary with her vocabulary. Fran's a smart girl with a vivid imagination for her age, but she struggles to understand cursive and was confirmed to be in standard American education, so I think it's fair to put a kind of limit on how much she could dream up from her own limited perspective. Leon's journal details Thirsta and all these fantastical creatures, so either this doctor is a secret writer and Fran just stole all of his ideas, or perhaps Leon got a little high in his own supply during his retirement and began to experience what Fran experienced. But if I'm questioning the validity of some chapters, then what chapters are undeniably true? Most of Chapter 1 should be deemed trustworthy. Her exposure to duotine seems to be minimal before she starts popping pills like Wheezy, and the various other problems the children have seem like their own problems that the nurses need to deal with separate from Fran. Her escape is kind of questionable, but I'll come back to it in a second. There's also the scene with Grace asking for Fran to be taken home, which is kind of odd considering what Grace has planned for her, but I think it's something to do with her experiment purpose, which Deern is ignorant of. We're left with Fran and Deern in the car for Chapter 4. This also seems incredibly reliable because Deern doubts anything she's saying, but is also shocked when he sees her at all. So Chapter 1 can safely be assumed to recount her escape from the asylum and subsequent recapture accurately. Fran gets an ultra-reality vision that tells her a part of Deern's past that he confirms is true, despite his insistence that she's just seeing things. So combined with Leon's journal, there is absolute evidence that these 5 realms may genuinely exist. The chapter does end with another Remor appearance and Fran being shackled to her bed in the 5th realm, but Grace, Deern, and Oswald all appear normal, as does her cat. So perhaps Fran is seeing flickers of the 5th reality overlapping reality 3 of what's actually happening. A common theory for everything fantastical being a delusion is Fran being chained at the start of the chapter. People suggest that her adventures could merely be daydreaming and projection and retellings, but I strongly believe that she did escape and was recaptured. Remorse seems to be a genuine entity outside of our reality, somehow in contact with Oswald, which is kind of tenuous and makes me scratch my head, but I can't really think of a strong way to explain it. What is Oswald even up to? He clearly had an interest in twins, but he's intensely interested in the study of human brains and the pineal gland. Lobotomies are something he performs on some children, seen in the basement and from the surgical scars on patients. I didn't catch any scars on Fran herself anywhere, so she seems to have not gotten one yet. I am aware that some lobotomies go through the nose with an ice pick, but I feel like there isn't entirely enough evidence to support it, but that seems to be what they were rushing for at the end of the game, to give her a lobotomy. But why is Fran special? Twins are a recurring theme throughout the game, and we know that Fran was specifically prescribed a new special dose of duotine, so this research could very easily be connected with human consciousness and the exploration of the 5 realms. They don't seem to understand that Fran is experiencing ultra-reality at that exact moment. However, Mr. Midnight can be our marker for reality happening. Deern thinks he's been dead for some time, but perhaps Grace captured him and got some other cat killed in its place to make Fran think he was dead, perhaps to use as a bargaining chip later. It's kind of hard to determine what her dropping him off a cliff translates to with regular person reality, but she acts like he's alive in Chapter 5, then has him hostage, then seems to kill him. Oswald knows about Remor, and Grace likely does too to some extent, but but Fran clearly has the best understanding of all of this. Dying in Realm 3 does not entirely mean the end of consciousness, as we can see with the twins. Death is just a state of mind. The most puzzling part of the third chapter is Fran becoming a tree. The chapter is called Vegetative State for a reason, so perhaps Fran internalized some kind of coma awareness after passing out in the woods. The lie the nurses told the press say she was stuck out there for days. But what if she really was lost out there for days and fell into a coma? That would explain why we kept seeing forests and internalizing her own condition within the realms, even if she doesn't fully understand it herself. Pelantris being a doctor can also be a reflection of a doctor performing some kind of surgery or procedure in her comatose state, but I doubt it's the lobotomy. That could be the moment she fell into a coma and nearly everything has been dreamt up as well, if you choose to interpret it like that. My final conclusion is that Dr. Oswald's experiments were about the 5 realms involving Fran's brain because of some unspecified properties of twins, and since she is a daughter of a twin, her brain was perhaps more susceptible to the ectoplomatine needed to experience the mental journey, but the user's mind clearly does influence some of these realms. Remor and the darkness have some kind of symbiotic relationship with people's fears, feeding off of them, but also taking form from them. Fran loves animals and nature, so Athirsta is filled with both of those things, taking cues from the real world. So dead animals and desecrated corpses of said animals representing evil is from Fran's own thoughts and feelings. Itward appears to other children, but also has unique Fran-only properties of being her imaginary friend early on, but he can easily be both. It's a difficult concept to wrap your head around, that two things that seemingly clash can be true at the same time, but remember that we're told over and over again that regular people cannot fully grasp and interpret what is happening in these realms, and often pass out and lose their minds, with their eyes going white and bleeding. We see that with Fran, Leon, and even Deern. The realms are affected by human consciousness, but also exist separately, like they're always being viewed through the filter of what makes sense to humans and how we can interpret it. If someone from a totally different corner of the world suddenly went to Realm 5, would their experience be the exact same as Fran's? Likely not. The bloody messages on the wall and specific delusions of the self are clearly shaped by the individual on display from whoever can perceive it. Now that we have all our puzzle pieces on the table, I'll explain things once more. Oswald's asylum takes in children without families to perform twisted experiments on them, with a pair of twin girls named Lucia and Grace Dagenhart under his care, and later a pair of baby girls, the twins. Oswald and presumably Leon run these experiments throughout the early 20th century, and as the Dagenharts grow up, Grace becomes devoted to Oswald, while Lucia is rebellious. We see this split in their family photo. Lucia's collar is white, symbolically aligning herself with the Velokas in virtuous light, while Grace's is black. It is symbolically connected to the darkness, Kamalas, Remor, Makuba. Lucia somehow escapes and gets pregnant when she meets Martin Bow, whom we know almost nothing about. Grace and Lucia keep contact to the point where Fran considers Grace a trusted family member, which is really questionable on Lucia's end. Like, how did she not know Grace was about that life somehow? How would she not guess? Kind of an idiot. The nature of Fran's family isn't super well known past "I love mommy and daddy" from Fran's perspective, but there's just one implication that they may have been a little neglectful. Daddy was not there, mommy would not care is found in the asylum, written in blood. Oswald and Remor are somehow able not only to communicate, but agree to a set of terms. We really don't know more than that, and I'm shaking my head to figure out why Remor would care about Oswald like that, but he listened anyways and possesses Fran to kill her own parents. Remor leaves her body and she finds the corpses and runs away in the woods. Staff at Oswald's finds her, fibbed about her being dead to the press, and kept her locked away in the asylum with other children they're experimenting on. Despite their best efforts to keep her imprisoned and on duotine, Fran is able to escape, with some help from Itward, a kind of gray area character associated with life and death who originates from the Fourth Realm, who monitors the children of the asylum. Ultra reality swaps from straight horror to the fantastical as she meets these weird fantasy creatures, meets the twins, is brought to Athirsta, escapes, then finds Itward on her way back home, but is brought back to Oswald's. The jig is up and Grace reveals that she's working with Oswald, and does not care for Fran at all, but still seems to miss her sister, at least a little bit. She kills Mr. Midnight, which causes Fran to try and kill her, Oswald shoots her, but curiously, Itward is able to influence them by pushing them away, a rare instance of a creature actively interacting with the world, rather than the other way around. So what we're seeing here is either an abstraction of events and is more brutal than depicted, or Itward literally just force pushed them away. Deern can fully interact with them because he got juiced with a shot of advanced duotine from Fran after he was presumably caught by Grace. But his mind can't fully comprehend what he's seeing and he begins to bleed. His life is saved by banishing him away, like they disconnected the part of his brain able to comprehend the 5 realms. Fran retreating back to Ithursta with friends is hard to explain. If you still think she's in a coma, then she sort of surrendered to her imagination and delusions, with Ithursta being the fantasy land she's never going to awake from. But on the other hand, if we're still believing that these realms are a real thing, which is what I'm going with, then Fran genuinely could be transported away from Realm 3, perhaps not just in mind, but in body, and living there happily. But this is the crux of Fran Bow. You are never given a straight answer. With all the evidence and testimonies presented, there is an absurd amount of wiggle room in your interpretations, and this works exceptionally well within Fran's viewpoint. We're given such a limited, even conflicting view on the story and thrown into a world that doesn't make sense, just like how Fran has to navigate an adult and magical world she doesn't understand. It translates that unique brand of fear that a child would experience during such a life-changing event. And clearly, this unorthodox story was told with such care that it strongly resonated with its target audience. I could be getting some details completely wrong, or I could have missed something right in front of me that someone else caught that wildly changes interpretations. There is a general consensus to this plot, but people are still free to chart their own conclusions, which helps keep it in a constant conversation. To this day, people still ask questions and discuss its meaning, which is the universal sign of victory accomplished for any surrealist piece of media. But while the broad strokes do a masterful job at conveying such a dark, conniving world with a hidden magical side rooted both in fantasy and in science, the small details that don't entirely make sense begin to pile up. Oswald and Ramora's relationship, Lucia not suspecting Grace at all despite having an insanely valid reason to be incredibly suspicious, are just 2 examples of some plot beats that made me go, huh? It's not that these are exactly plot holes, but I do think the game sometimes gets in its own way and doesn't explain things that would really go a long way for player immersion and just making a coherent plot in general. A ton of background details deepen the lore and cohesiveness of the world building, while some feel like they're just to throw you off course, like an intentional monkey wrench to make you confused. I know that was the intention, but when Fran Bow is compared to other games like that, it can sometimes fall a bit short at having a perfect tie of consistency and conspiracy. Like, what was up with the younger Fran moment? Was it implying that her stay at Oswald's was far longer than expected and even more of her past is subject to scrutiny? I honestly have no clue. The central theme of this story is viewing the world through a troubled child's perspective, which is why we start off in an asylum full of mentally unstable children who are survivors of some of the world's worst abuses. Which does feel kind of odd to introduce first thing and then almost never ever get that dark again. Like, we go from seeing the effects of childhood molestation to flying through a magical wonderland really quickly without a lot of breathing room. I think it's a wonderful pitch black tale told carefully enough to respect the very real conditions that some children have gone through while telling its own story about consciousness and human experimentation, which was in the style at the time. It had some hiccups, perhaps even some inconsistencies, but it stuck the landing, which is all it needed to do to work. I confess that I had to keep watching my own footage over and over again to make sure I was getting things right, and I did find some external coverage of the game that helped my perspective. I'm going to plug Uri Clarke's video about the game as well as his channel. We cover a ton of the same games, but this guy is an actual video essayist with like thesis statements and arguments and not whatever the hell I'm doing here. He's criminally underrated, so show the guy some love. Fran Bow's release in 2015 was positively gargantuan, to put it lightly. It was a smash indie hit immediately, but where it particularly took off was with YouTubers, like I mentioned at the beginning. It was a very simple puzzle game with a rock-solid aesthetic with a story that consistently left you guessing after each chapter, and it worked so well that people could just watch someone else play the game and get a pretty comparable experience to playing it. Everyone has their own favorite creator they saw play this game, which led to them probably watching it to completion or buying the game on their own. Killmonday reported that during their first month of release, they sold 10,000 copies, which was far higher than they ever expected. Almost immediately, they went from being dead broke and having no money to really advertise the game to being richly rewarded, both financially and creatively, because Fran Bow was received with overwhelming praise from fans, both as a puzzle game, but also as a delightfully personal story. The gameplay of Fran Bow is so simple, and there are plenty of other games that do far more for the genre, so it was the narrative that really set it apart. I'm not the first person to feel a deep, intimate connection with the story, and that's because Natalie wrote it from a place of rich experience. It was autobiographical in a lot of ways, and fiercely introspective, and a ton of people not only enjoyed it, many people related to it. People who've experienced the kind of pain that Natalie and subsequently Fran have gone through felt seen and even understood. They often fall through the cracks and might not have a way to vent and deal with the pain and the grief because some of these subjects are so hard to talk about, let alone represent in video games. But Fran Bow wasn't afraid to do so this game ended up being a coping mechanism for some. Fran could easily be a stand-in for anyone who's suffered greatly in life and has used daydreaming and fiction to cope with something. But maybe it's just my perspective as an outsider looking in, but Fran Bow has become a pretty popular game in horror titles focusing on the experiences of young women. I don't think it leans super strong into a very distinct horror of womanhood theme like Silent Hill 3, but you're going to find a ton of art of Fran with Heather and other popular women in horror franchises. I find there's a specific subgenre of horror more catered to women than Fran Bow comfortably settles in. Perhaps something about her helpless status and how the few people in her life don't take her pleas seriously related more to a female audience. Or maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there. Tell me in the comments below if I'm talking nonsense or not, because I feel like a lot of people underestimate how much women represent the general broader horror community. It's not entirely uncommon for a lot of people to dub it their very favorite game of all time, judging by the comments on videos the company uploads. The game reviewed somewhat tepidly critically, but it's not hard to see why. Super ambiguous ending, charming but very simplistic mechanics, and a lot of people felt like the game kinda peaked in the first chapter. I can see why people say that, and I kind of agree with some of those, but by no means is Fran Bow a masterpiece mechanically. It's clearly a company's first game, but that's why I liked it so much. Oh yeah, here's where I rank all the chapters, by the way. Usually I try and analyze how much a game sells, but I honestly couldn't find much. So I just checked the Steam reviews and assumed a lot. The game being so easy to watch someone else play is an interesting conundrum. I thought it would affect sales more, but the game is so cheap and goes on sale so frequently that the Let's Players are basically free advertisement. With this popularity and funds, Killmonday was not only able to keep their doors open, but continue on creatively. They eventually got a website, merchandise, and published Fran Bow on mobile devices in 2016 and consoles in 2023, with the Switch version even getting an incredibly limited physical release, which I just so happen to have. Oh, there's a makeshift plush too. Merchandise is one thing, but Killmonday quickly learned from their first game and began to improve themselves with their second, Little Misfortune, which came out in 2019, and is ostensibly a step up presentation-wise. What's the deal with that game, and does it connect to Fran Bow? Well, you're gonna have to check my Patreon exclusive review for that one to find out. You know where to look. But what is Killmonday up to right this second? Well, they're working on a new game, and by the looks of it, Fran's back for another adventure. She still has that goofy bob cut. It looks like her story is far from over, and whenever that game comes out, you know I'll be there. Stick around to see me cover more titles like this. But until then, have a lovely rest of your day. Stay strange.